There lies a porcelain throne. You're listening to the Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and it has been a huge week in Seattle. On Wednesday, I get a call from a friend seeing if I have tickets to see the Pearl Jam home shows, and I didn't have tickets. But my friend hooked my wife and I up to go see Ament and crew put on an amazing show. And while I've seen a lot of bands in my time, man, those dudes can play. So that was Wednesday. Friday and Saturday, I hosted Obliteride and was blown away with how impactful this event is. Over 2,000 riders and walkers came together to raise over $2 million for cancer research. And it was a pretty awesome, long Saturday for me. I finally get home after Obliteride and the Sub Pop event is going on. It's their 30-year anniversary show on Alki Beach. I thought it was going to be a total shit show because Alki usually has about 10 to 15,000 people down on a busy weekend. They were anticipating 60,000 people. And man, those guys crushed it. They delivered, and it was an all-time event for Seattle music and Alki Beach. This all takes me to today and my guest, Luke Aikins. Luke is part of the Red Bull Air Force and is known globally as the dude that jumped into a net without a parachute. And while he did that, he has done so many badass things and lived through a tragedy that is one of all of our greatest fears that his story is incredible. Before we get into Luke and his story, I need to ask you to please follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement and share my posts on Facebook. Please send me an email if you have a guest that you'd like to hear or you just have something to share. My email is mike@thepowellmovement, and it's always great to hear from you. Finally, I want to thank my sponsors. They are Evo, Rescue Water, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk to Luke Aikins. So we are in Shelton, Washington. We are on Luke Aikins' property, which he shares with his cousin, Andy Farrrington. How many acres do we have here, Luke?
Between Andy and I think there's 39 acres.
And it's a gated community. And when I say community, it's just you, your cousin, and families, and kids, and airplanes, and the biggest hangar, because most people have a garage with their toys in it. You have a hangar with what kind of car was in there?
It's a 67 Camaro convertible.
And you built that thing up from the ground pretty much?
Close. I bought it with the bodywork done, and then I started adding stuff to it every year for the last, 12 years or so, and it's pretty close to done now.
And then you've got an airplane, motorcycles, you've got a landing strip out there. Pretty much your dream home, I would think.
Yeah, pretty fortunate. I mean, Andy bought this property a while ago, and he split it up into a couple pieces. And the plan was always to move here and build our house on this lot and raise our kids together. And now it's kind of happened, and we're pretty stoked on the whole deal.
So it's a family affair out here, and skydiving has paid for this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of the fortunate guys in skydiving that I was able to take my passion and actually make it into a profitable career up to this point. I'm very fortunate that I have a house and a plane, and I skydive for a living.
I don't see too many skydivers' lives, but coming to Luke's property, I will say that it's better than most skiers or snowboarders' lives that I've seen because you have a beautiful property, an insane house. The floor here is made from ski lodge rubber, so you can do whatever you want here. And it's nice to see an athlete who has taken all the money he's made and turned it into something that'll last a lifetime.
We're a little fortunate being skydivers. We don't have to live in the mountains. You know, I don't live in Aspen or Vail, and I don't have to live in these big expensive ski lodges. So we move out here in the country. We're out here in Shelton. Things are a little bit cheaper out here than they are in the epic mountains of the world.
And you are out in the middle of nowhere. I know last night we both went to the Pearl Jam concert, which was fantastic. And from you, it's an hour and a half drive. But how do you go to the concerts in Seattle?
So last night I actually jumped in Andy's plane. Mine's being worked on. My wife and I hopped in Andy's airplane and flew from here. It took us about 20 minutes to get into Boeing Field. And in under 50 minutes, we were at the Pyramid having a beer, getting ready for watch Pearl Jam last night, my wife and I.
That's pretty amazing. Was it your first time seeing them?
It was not my first time seeing them. I saw them when I was about 20 years old at the Showbox. You know, I'm not a huge concert guy. If I want to enjoy the music, I think I can hear it better on my radio. But going and experiencing that with all the Seattle people, I mean, it was unreal. It made you feel a real homer with sports, music, all that stuff. So it was a really cool experience to get to watch them last night.
In life, though, you were born in Texas, right?
I was born in Corpus Christi, Texas. Yeah, my dad was in the Navy when I was born, so we traveled around a lot. In my younger years, we lived in Texas and Guam and Japan and traveled the world as a military brat.
How long did you do that?
I think by the time I was in the 4th grade, we were pretty much settled out there in Puyallup, where we grew up, out there in Graham. Washington was always home. It's where my dad was born. That's where my dad and mom met. It's kind of where we grew up, all in Puyallup, Washington there. So we always came back to here, but it opens your eyes to the world when you're traveling around. We lived off base in Japan for a couple months, which is quite the experience when you're in the 2nd grade. It opens up your eyes to the world. You're experiencing, you're out there riding bicycles with kids. You can't speak the language at all, but all kids understand playing and goofing off and riding bikes and getting in trouble.
The roots are here in Washington, and I think it all starts with your grandfather, right? Did he start the Washington roots?
My grandpa, he started us all in skydiving. They grew up in Puyallup. My grandpa, actually, I don't know where he was born. Most of their life was in the Puyallup-Tacoma area. He used to ride motorcycles with a club out of Tacoma and race flat track and all that stuff. In the war, he was a pilot. He flew P-47s and got shot up, tried to open up his cockpit to get out of the airplane. Couldn't get out because it was all broken up. And so he ended up crash landing in the Allied territory. No big deal. It comes back. And he always had wondered that day what it would have been like if he got to jump out. So he came back from the war. Him and a couple buddies, they went out to a local club up there in Puyallup and actually made a skydive. And that started the family down the road of aviation and skydiving, and he loved it so much. He and his buddy took over the club and turned it into that. Andy's parents, my aunt and uncle, turned that club into a hobby, into a business, and now they run a full-blown skydiving operation all year round.
All the families involved, wives, husbands, kids, uncles. I think there's a standard in your family of when you're allowed to jump, and we can talk about that in a bit, but everybody's involved, right?
Everybody has something to do with it or has at one time or another. The Farringtons, Andy's mom and dad kind of took that, and that's their full-blown business. Andy and his sister Carrie take it over. I'm over there filling in when I can. I'm traveling quite a bit these days. My brother skydived, my sister, my dad did, my mom. Mom hasn't jumped since I was born, but she made a bunch of jumps when she was pregnant with me. So, we've been doing this forever.
And so your dad's a Navy pilot.
Yeah, my dad was a pilot. He learned to fly before he went to the military. Went to college at Wazoo and then headed off, joined the military. Because back then, being an airline pilot was what he'd always wanted to do. Airline pilots at the time were like doctors and lawyers. That's what you wanted to be, right? That was like the peak of what there was. So my dad wanted to be an airline pilot. The only way to get that way back then was to build hours in the military. So he flew all kinds of planes in the military, C-130s, like all that stuff. We traveled all over doing that. And then he went to work for United Airlines.
If a kid's got a dad who's a cop, he probably wants to be a cop. If he's got a dad who's a firefighter, he wants to be a firefighter. If he has a dad who's a home builder, he probably doesn't want to be a home builder. But for you had a dad who was a pilot. Is that all you wanted to do?
Yeah, I always wanted to fly. And I knew that for me, my personality, growing up in it and watching my dad was a very patient guy. He had the time and he could sit there and fly flat and level and follow all the rules and do everything exactly the way you're supposed to. And I've been always a little bit wilder. So I always knew I wanted to do something in aviation. I love flying. I love skydiving. And how was I able to make that into something? I knew I wasn't going to be an airline pilot. Probably not in my cards. So I found another route, another avenue, and mostly it's skydiving. But in the past bunch of years, I've been doing a lot more flying. I bought an aerobatic airplane, doing all that kind of goofing off.
Is that more fun for you? Is that a hobby, the aerobatic stuff? I know Red Bull has different types of things with their planes. Are you at that level?
I'm definitely not at that level. I've definitely started that a little bit late. If I could go back in time, I probably would pursue a little more of that sooner. We didn't have aerobatic planes when I was growing up. Aunt and uncle's planes were into skydiving, right? Everything was purposely built. We had a little family 172 that you could fly around, but nothing that you were able to do that kind of stuff with. So my first plane I purchased was an aerobatic airplane. And Andy and I went up and taught ourselves how to do aerobatics, reading a book. And Andy's in the back seat reading a book, telling me the speeds and the altitudes, and I'm doing the front, and then we'd switch spots, and we kind of learned that way until we got to know like Kirby Chambliss and some of those guys. Then we asked questions once in a while.
So kids out there, if you have money to buy a plane, all you need is the internet or a book and someone sitting in the back seat telling you what to do. You also need to know how to fly the plane, and it should be pretty fun.
Yeah, reading's important, I guess.
Yeah, you should read, and then you should take that reading to real life and practice it. What else was important to you when you were growing up?
Yeah, it's kind of like you said before, you do everything that your parents are into, like my dad skiing, my grandpa was skiing. He'd take us up to Crystal Mountain all the time as a kid. I grew up going up there from 4 years old, skiing at Crystal Mountain. enjoying that a lot. The ski racing schools up there and stuff. We had a great time doing that. Sports were always really fun. I like to organize sports a lot more. I like the team atmosphere. I think nowadays all my friends or most of the people that I know are big into, the alternate sports, right? The alternative sports, the ski and the wakeboard, the things you're kind of doing on your own. I still sort of like the idea of the whole team atmosphere. I like being able to depend on the guy next to you and them depending on you, which is pretty neat. Going back to it, I guess every time I would play, couldn't wait to get back to skydiving at the end of the day.
And what did you play? You're built like you could be a football player.
Yeah, we did the soccer. I was a big swim at Rogers High School for a little bit. And
you were a high school swimmer?
Yeah, it seems weird, right?
Well, it doesn't seem cool.
It was cool at the time. I looked good in a Speedo.
Yeah, you had to wear Speedos. That's probably why I don't think it's cool.
At the end of the day, all I could think about was the skydiving. Once I was able to start jumping at 16 on my own, and I started skydiving, I just never looked back. That was all I wanted to do for fun. And
the family practices at 12, you're able to tandem. Is that right?
In the United States, you're not allowed to make a tandem jump until you're 18. Some of us got to do them at 12 years old, maybe in other places where we weren't, breaking any rules. I made my first tandem jump when I was 12, and then I started skydiving when I was 16, solo.
And that's your family practice, like Andy did that as well.
Andy did the same thing. His sister Carrie did the same thing. I was able to take my sister Abigail, who was quite a bit younger than me. I was able to take her on her first tandem when we were in Europe. We were in Switzerland. A local skydiving school there that we knew, they let me take their tandem rig, and I took my sister on a tandem jump in Switzerland. So it's been kind of the way it's gone, but we don't really start them early. There's some operations where people say forget the rule and they start their kids nice and early. We've all followed it up till now, but I've never had a kid till this point. I have a 6-year-old, and it's going to be hard for me when he asks to go skydiving for me to say he's got to wait.
Speaking of having to wait, when you get on your first solo jump, it's at 16. But I feel like it was supposed to be on your 16th birthday, or that was how the family did it. But for some reason, that didn't happen for you.
Yeah, most of it, I'm the older of, Andy and Carrie. We had 2 other cousins that were jumping, Todd and Kelly. And everybody, I'd planned on doing it when I was 16. In high school, I tend to get in a lot of trouble. I was not following the rules. I think I borrowed the family vehicle when my parents were out of town. And I drove it to the local high school football game and got in trouble from my aunt, Andy's mom. Showed up at the game and busted me. Big trouble. And I ended up not being able to skydive on my 16th birthday. So my birthday's in November. I didn't get to jump until April. And that killed me the whole time. Getting grounded, the vehicles taken away, all that stuff never really bothered me. The big one for me was not being able to skydive. And that just devastated me. That was the one thing that my parents had control of that. And that was the one thing that was worth me following the rules to be able to do.
Probably from the point you're 12, you're just thinking about when you turn 16.
It was never about if I was going to skydive. It was when. As soon as I was allowed to jump, then I was full in. I just wanted – and my first jump was fun. It was exciting, but I was a little bit scared, the first one by yourself. But my second jump is when it all set in. It was hooked on my second jump. First one you did, and you're really excited, but, man, you were nervous. You looked in at my dad, and my Uncle Jeff was flying, and I stepped off the plane, a little rope opened my parachute for me, and it all happened so fast. And you're 16, it's a little overwhelming. And you land, and then you go up for a second jump. My second jump, I remember everything about it. I remember the noises it made. I remember the words everybody said, exactly how the parachute opened.
It's amazing that it can just take over like that right away. But you're in high school still, and I wouldn't think there's many high schoolers that have the passion for skydiving that you have just because you got to be born into it.
No, my friends, my girlfriends and stuff, everybody thought that I was, all I wanted to do on the weekends. I didn't really want to go to the lake with everybody after practice or, whatever. All I wanted to do was go skydiving. And so I would go home and I would work at the drop zone, whether it was packing parachutes or cleaning up, so I could make jumps, right? And they were all thinking I was wasting my time. And now it's pretty funny when we get together every once in a while, like a little reunion and stuff. All that wasted time actually worked out pretty good for me.
Yeah. Well, because back then they're just talking not behind your back, but really behind your back because you're not there. Like, oh, he's missing it. He's missing this. And then 20 years later, when they come to your beautiful house and they're like, oh, I guess he wasn't missing anything. What he was doing then built this today.
We're all just amazed. You look at your friends and everybody's pretty successful and everyone's chose their own route. And I'm pretty fortunate to have stuck with what I wanted to do and be able to make it work out.
So in high school, what would your superlative be if you had to put one on you? Most likely to succeed?
Definitely not.
Class clown?
More class clown for sure. I was goof off, class clown, loud. I always had the comments, pleasure to have in class. That was about the best comment I ever got on my report card.
And what year did you graduate?
92 from Bethel High School.
I graduated in 92 as well. So did you see Guns N' Roses and Metallica that summer?
I did. Billy Idol on Halloween, too.
What do you do after high school? What's your move?
So after high school, I got full into skydiving, and that's all I wanted to do. So you get your instructor ratings, and you get jumps. You start building up your instructor ratings. And just out of high school, I started looking into, what I was doing. And I looked around all the skydiving mentors, let's say. They were older than me. They were either in the military or just getting out of the military, and they were skydiving every day, and it looked like so much fun. But then I also looked at the end of the day, when everybody went home. I was still living at my parents' house, and I would go home and have this nice house, and my dad had an airplane in his hangar, and you're not going to be able to afford that in 93, 94 on skydiving alone. Everybody had another job, construction, something. And I just didn't want to be for lack of a better term, the skydiving bum, you know what I mean? Who's just living for that next jump, which I did, but I'm like, how can I make that work for me? So I started getting into some construction stuff from my Uncle Jeff and a friend of his. I started running heavy equipment. I did that for a couple of years, and I bought my own equipment, and I started running a business like that, but it was only days when we weren't skydiving. I would work in the morning, and then at noon we were done so we could go jumping.
And how often are you jumping? Like 10 times a week, 20 times a week?
20 times a week in the summer would be a low estimate for sure back then. I mean, I was making 1,000 jumps a year. Rain or shine, we're out there jumping, having a good time. But I knew that I couldn't afford to own an airplane and property and a home someday if all I was doing was being that instructor working for somebody else.
Yeah.
So I started, figuring out how to do it. And I started doing the construction, and that worked pretty well for me for a long time. And I was able to skydive for fun. I still worked and taught people and did all that stuff, but I had a little money. So when we started competing and traveling around the world, jumping in different competitions, and I was staying with everybody and everyone's taking turns sleeping on the floor in the hotel room. When it was my night to sleep on the floor in the hotel room, I would get my own room.
It's nice to be able to be a ski bum or a skydive bum or a snowboard bum. But at the end of the day, if you want to come home to a place you're not renting, it's hard to do that unless you have a trust fund, which I don't think you had.
No, I have total respect for the people who could do that. Like, I look at some of my friends who the gypsy lifestyle, they could travel around and just kind of live out of their car, and they're enjoying life and I need a home. I need a place I can go to that I can call my home base. I'm really a homebody at that.
I would say that maybe at 18 to 32, you can do that. I mean, even you being a homebody could probably live that lifestyle. Once you hit a certain age, you kind of like to have the comforts of home. And if you've just played your whole life up until you get to that certain age, then you realize it's going to be really hard to get what you want.
Yeah, you're behind the ball for sure.
But you probably lived more than...
more than most people do in their whole life.
Yeah. So was there any thought of college at all?
I pretended to go to college for a semester at Pierce College there in Tacoma. My folks were more than willing to and wanted to pay for college. I barely made it out of high school. I tried to go for a semester. I ended up taking my book money and spending it and goofing off. It just really wasn't for me. I didn't feel like I had the aptitude for that kind of stuff. It took me longer, not that I couldn't do it, but my buddies could read the exact same thing and one time through, and they could know it and be able to pass a test and all that. It would take me a lot more work to get that way. Looking back now and learning, having a 6-year-old and figuring it all out, that I'm 100% dyslexic.
Okay.
For sure. I would have had no idea. But I mean, even flying the airplanes, which I love, right? I'm flying to Seattle last night. The guy gives me a squawk and he says the numbers and I flip flop them. It's kind of like every day. And you just learn to deal with that. And as my career went on, I ended up being all right without going to college.
It seems like everything's worked out, but I would think that there might be pressure from the family or like, hey, we're going to pay for it and we really want you to go. And was there a big conversation, or at the end of the day, were they pretty cool?
Well, I was the oldest. So my parents, hey, we're going to pay for college if you want to go. I would have had to go to community college even to get into a real one. And I just didn't do it. My sister, my 2 brothers, their college all paid for. They did their thing. I had to borrow money from my parents to start my business, paid them back, the whole bit. So I went down the more trade route, and I think that that's one thing I learned from being a kid, and I'm trying to give to my son, is that as long as he chooses to do something that's going to be furthering his life, whether it's a trade school or starting a business or whatever, that money we're putting away for college, I don't think that college is the end all be all anymore to being a success.
No.
I think in my parents' age, it was. If you went to college, you were guaranteed a different lifestyle than someone who didn't go to college. And I don't think that's the way it is anymore.
So when you're getting your 20 jumps a week back in the summers and you're learning, because I'm sure at this point you're still learning here and there, but you're learning a lot more in the beginning when you're learning about your gear and everything that's going on. Do you have any close calls early where you learned some lessons?
Yeah, I mean, back then we were trying to invent some stuff in skydiving. Skydiving is as safe as you want to make it. And some of us were trying to take it, and they're jumping these big parachutes and floating down and doing this kind of what I call old school skydiving, which is super safe and super conservative. And I mean, it's hard to say conservative when you're jumping out of an airplane.
Right.
But some of us were starting to think about flying our parachutes much faster and doing turns low to the ground and building up speed and coming in. And I broke a few bones trying to figure out new ways to do things, like in any sport, any alternative sport. The dudes just started hucking flips. I'm sure there were some bruised up body parts in those times. For me, though, that summer when I don't know what year it was when Point Break came out, maybe 92, 90 maybe. That summer, though, in skydiving was epic. That changed the face of skydiving that year. So I was just out of high school, just in high school, right in there, and I was instructor at the drop zone. We went from classes of 15 people on a Saturday to 60 people, all because of Point Break.
So Swayze helped change the sport.
For sure. That pushed the sport to the next level.
And that made it so people could have a career as a skydiver other than being a bum?
I think it made our sport grow exponentially. And so as the sport grows, more people are aware of it. Tandem skydiving comes in, and people are able to start making a lot better living at skydiving.
Well, speaking of making a living, I am going to talk about my sponsors real quick. And my first sponsor is Evo, and they are hands down the best retail location in the country for bike, skate, wake, surf, lifestyle, and more. And they have everything you could possibly want for your adventure. I have personally shopped at Evo since they opened because no one comes close to the service they offer and the vibe they create. Their stores in Denver, Seattle, and Portland are some of the best retail experiences you'll find. And if you can't make it to a store, well, Evo.com has all the brands, all the products, and a low price guarantee, free shipping on orders over $50, and a no-hassle return policy. For listening to the show, they're going to give you 10% off your entire order. If you're in-store, mention the code TPM10 to your cashier. And if you're online, use the code TPM10. That's all one word with capital letters, and you'll get that 10% off. My next sponsor is Rescue Water. And now that it's summer, hydrating is more important than ever. And with Rescue Water, it's all about proactive recovery. You're probably asking yourself, what does proactive recovery even mean? Well, think of it like this. If you really need energy, you skip the coffee and go straight to an energy drink. It's a similar principle with Rescue Water. When you really need to hydrate, like when you get off the trail, out of the skate park, done at the gym, or with your run, skip the traditional sports drink and try a Rescue Water. It's science and it works. And while this is an advertisement, I really do drink Rescue Water at the end of big nights. And for me, hangovers are a thing of the past. If you've been listening to the podcast and haven't tried a Rescue Water yet, do me a favor and buy one next time you're at the store. It will make you a believer and you can thank me later. If you don't want to go to the store, check out rescuewater.com. That's resqwater.com. And save 20% on a 12-pack case with the code RESQWaterTPM. That is all one word. Rescue Water is also available on Amazon. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. There are so many things I can say about 10 Barrel, but first and foremost, they have amazing beer. My personal favorite is the Out of Office Pilsner, but a close second is the wildly popular pub beer. While 10 Barrel is all about beer, their roots are in action sports, and they put their money where their heart is. And you can see that in the athletes and events they sponsor, but most importantly, this podcast. Support the beer that supports action sports, the 10 Barrel Brewery. Find out more about the beers and events over at 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors, and we can get back into it with you. And it evolves after Point Break to a point where there are competitions and there are places to start traveling and skydiving. I remember the X Games eventually had sky surfing, I think it was, where it's like a cameraman and a dude on a snowboard. And are you participating in every aspect of skydiving that you can at that point?
At that point, it was a weird time in my career with skydiving because I was more into the flying the small parachutes coming in fast and hot, where you hook turn them real low to the ground. You build up about 70 miles an hour speed, transfer that speed to horizontal, and you go zipping across the ground where this is dragging your toe across water. and all these type of competitions. That was more the way I was going. I thought sky surfing, I did it about 40 times, maybe not even 40 times. It was kind of a weird one to me. I didn't really get the kick off of it. Like, it looks really cool when they're doing it. But when you're doing it, you don't feel like you're zipping across the sky like Superman, you know? It's not like the wingsuits of today. But it was really cool because that opened the X Games to skydiving, right? We had free flying where dudes are doing little maneuvers together and sky surfing. And that really opened it up. And like, that was the Tony Hawk days of skydiving.
Yeah, so this is like 95-ish maybe?
Yeah, I mean, there'd always been competitions, but now they're televised on MTV, right?
Yeah.
X Games, ESPN, the whole bit.
And are you going to these competitions?
I didn't do any of the X Games. I chose to be, which looking back now, I probably would have gone the other way. And my advice to kids, anybody, whatever you're doing, instead of being a big fish in a little pond, like up here in the Northwest, I was a pretty big fish in the Northwest, my little pond. I didn't branch out until I got a little bit older. And I wished I would have gone to some of these other skydiving meccas around the country and the world when I was much younger, because I would have advanced everything, you know, but you're a little bit scared. You get to your hometown, your home drop zone, and you got all of these people that are looking kind of up to you in this little world, and you go there and you're a nobody. Right. But I would say, if you can, take that risk and go do it.
To me, because, you know, I've tandem jumped once, strapped like on a baby Bjorn to your cousin, and it was fun, but to me, I can't tell if someone's better or worse. As a skydiver, when you're out there and you look at someone, how can you tell someone's badass?
If you do a jump with somebody, let's say I'm going to do a wingsuit jump, right? And I think I'm awesome and I'm flying around the sky. And the guy goes by me like his shoes are on fire. He's way better than me. It's pretty obvious.
Okay.
When you get to this top level, everybody kind of finds their little niche, right? Their little one thing that makes them better at a certain part of skydiving. And I think where I have made my little niche is I'm well-rounded. I'm pretty good at all of it. I'm not the best at any one thing anymore, except maybe jumping without a parachute.
Yep.
Other than that, I think that, you know, being well-rounded is kind of where I found my niche.
And when you say all the different niches within it, I mean, there's base jumping, there's wingsuit flying, there's skydiving. Is that what you look at as the main?
Yeah, I mean, you have all of those. There's different types of actually exiting, right? Of getting into free fall, whether it's base jumping and wingsuiting, whatever. But then in skydiving alone, now you have, whether it's swooping, we call it, that's flying really tiny parachutes coming in real fast. You got wingsuit competitions, like a Red Bull event I put together where they're racing through Red Bull Aces, as 4-cross wingsuit race through some descending gates in the sky. And then you have competition relative work, which is kind of an old school way where they have predetermined geometric formations, and you have to make those on your way down. You have about 40 seconds working time to build as many of those as you can. And it's a high-paced, real fast. And that's more the traditional skydiving.
Okay.
So there's a whole bunch of things in skydiving. But realistically, if you're the best skydiver in the world, you're probably the best out of 80,000 people. That's the reality of what we do. It's such a small thing.
It's a small thing, but there's a barrier to entry. You have fear, money, and I mean, fear and money, I think, are the barrier to it.
Fear, money, and I think what else hurts our sport is that other sports, there's the big sports, the big action sports. I'm thinking of skateboarding, skiing, snowboarding. All those you could start as a little kid, right?
Yeah.
To skateboard, you can go buy a $40 board and go bang yourself up at a skate park for free, right? You can't skydive until you're 18 now. So it really hurts and it costs money. And, you know, I think that's what will always keep our sport held down a little bit.
And I can see that. And I would say in your career, from like 92 to 2002, you're working construction, you're making pretty good money, I would think, in skydiving for fun. And I'm going to fast forward to 2005 a little bit, because in your life, some heavy shit has happened to you in your life. And I want to say it's 2005 and you have an accident that happens. It's everyone's greatest fear. You're on a piece of heavy machinery. You have a nephew at your house. He comes in the house, comes back outside, you're unaware, and there's an accident, and you lose your nephew, and it has to crush you. I mean, there's no words that can explain how that has to crush you. But what happens right after? I mean, what kind of mood do you get into? I mean, obviously, I know you're crushed, and I'm not doing a good way of asking this question.
There's no good way for that. The accident that happened with my nephew was just him and I at home. And yes, he was my nephew, but he like stayed at our house 2 or 3 days a week. And like we kind of took him in, and on those days that my wife watched him and we became buddies, we were flying in planes and goofing off, you know, and then he, you know, having a great time, for the first 4 years of his life. And the accident happens at my house where I back over my nephew. And it kind of changes the whole course of everybody's life involved. Mine, my wife's, his parent, everybody who knew Colby. And so it changes everything. And you kind of go into 2 years basically of, trying to figure out what you're doing and does it matter, and everybody's watching you, and then the first time you go skydiving, everybody's a little worried that you're going to do something. It's a weird thing. And for me, that way out, where people talk about, whether you're hurting yourself or something, to me, that was never an option because that was the easy way out.
Yeah.
To leave that means you're not dealing with the consequences. You know what I mean? His life and everybody else's life's changed forever. And to not have to deal with that would be the easy way out. So, you make a skydive and it's touchy, and 2 years go by and I had to make money. So you started doing the heavy equipment stuff a little bit, but I hated it. I couldn't wait to get out of it. I had sold the bulldozer and I was just doing enough stuff to get by. And then was still skydiving, and I get a call to go help on a Red Bull jump, to jump into the Seahawks Stadium. And at the time, it was Quest Field, to jump in there. And it's my hometown, and I'm not a Red Bull guy, but like Pete Moran was like, hey, these two local guys, Andy and Luke, they live here, blah, blah, they should jump in. And I've been a Seahawks fan my whole life. And I go and I jump into the Seahawks Stadium, and, when I'm coming in and I see myself on the Jumbotron, I got a 12-man flag that I'd put in my pocket. I have a smoke and I have the game ball. And I'm flying down along the west side, inside the new stadium. On the west side, I'm getting ready to do a 180-degree turn back to the middle of the field to land at the 50-yard line. And I see myself on the Jumbotron, right? And my legs start shaking. My right leg starts shaking. And I'm like, there's no way I'm going to be able to stand up. This crosses your mind as you're getting ready to land. I turn, and obviously you stand up just fine, and you hand blitz the game ball. And that one jump I did with Red Bull there kind of helped redirect my energy and my life into doing a few more of those things with Red Bull. Then Red Bull, a year later, so asking me to become an athlete for Red Bull and skydive. And they kind of like, at a point in your life where you could go either direction,
Yeah.
A tragedy happens and it either tears your life apart, your wife, your family, all that stuff. And I mean, my wife stood by me, was there. She put me back together. We did all that. And so it changes. It makes you stronger as a family unit there.
Yep.
But also you never forget about it, like any day. I see kids, and now my son is a little bit older. And, we weren't going to have kids. And then we decided to a long time after the accident. And it really changes the way you think about everything. And now when you see the news and you hear of a terrible story, my heart obviously goes out to the family, but whoever that person is that caused that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Especially if there's if they're not drinking, they're not doing anything like that, to have those things happen, it changes that person. Right? You're no longer that happy-go-lucky guy. Everything from then on is a little bit different. You lose all of that innocence, Up until that moment, I would say we were pretty much living a charmed life.
Yeah. That's so heavy. And when you dive into a hole there, because I know Red Bull eventually kind of pulls you out, but is it 2 years of sitting on a couch in a dark room being upset?
No, you couldn't afford to do that, and my wife wouldn't have let that happen. She was in there. It was her brother's son. And, it could have gone bad for us also, but she kept things going, and we ended up, wasn't like in a dark room or anything like that. And you went and you obviously talked to some people and you deal with it. And I deal with it to this day. I mean, 2 days ago, I was backing the car out, and I had seen Logan, my son, in the house. I knew where he was, and I actually watched him walk in the door as I put the car in reverse, and you still have this flash.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then you get a little panic, attack and stuff like that. And this is a lot of years later, and I think that's with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, man, that's such a heavy thing to go through. And segue into Red Bull, which you already did, was you made it through.
And Red Bull knows nothing about this. They had nothing, it just happened to be that at this time in my life where I wasn't looking for an easy way out of something like that. And I think I said, when I talked to counselors about this stuff and the head quack doctors and that stuff, they said it's the wrong way to look at it. But for me, it was like, you have to deal with this. To me, it was almost like that is my punishment to deal with every single day. And if I'm not dealing with it by whether you get into drugs or alcohol heavy or any of that stuff, you aren't dealing with that. So you're not dealing with the consequences of what you did.
Yeah.
I know that they say that that's wrong, but that was how it helped me to deal with this.
And I think I would deal with it in that way too. It's just facing the music, and it's got to be the toughest thing that you've ever dealt with in your life. But you get that jump a couple years later into Quest Field, and that starts a whole new career for you. The energy drink Red Bull has created a lot of things for a lot of people. And in looking at the property that you have here and the life that you lead, you owe a shitload to Red Bull, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, Red Bull, like I said, they are one of those companies that reinvests in their athletes. You know, they get a lot of heat and people give a hard time because they say, hey, you know, there'll be an accident where a Red Bull athlete dies in the mountains or something. And they'll say, hey, is Red Bull pushing too hard? We're doing this stuff way before Red Bull came along.
Yep.
And we'll be doing it way after Red Bull. What Red Bull does is give us the opportunity to do it safer. They give us a little where you're not worried about, oh, I have to do this in order to make this money. You're now a little bit more secure in the, you know, you're not rich, but you have a sponsor that's paying you and they don't care if you do it or not.
Yeah.
Right. And that gives you a little bit of security in making the right decisions at the right times. So for me, a company that reinvests in their people and believes in them, and let's face it, I've been with Red Bull for 10 years. What kind of athlete gets to be with a company for 10 years? That doesn't happen.
No, there's not many that do. And the opportunities that they create for you, I mean, having them pay you is great. But, you know, if I would have asked you 15 years ago, you would have done all of this for the opportunities that were created. Just, hey, you're going to be able to help train Felix from coming in from the stratosphere. To me, I mean, if people haven't seen that jump, I'm sure it's all over the internet. How high did he jump from?
Yeah, I mean, that was a huge moment in my career also. Red Bull came along and they were, first Red Bull is sponsoring us. You get paid to go demonstrate, do demonstration jumps around the world and do cool stuff. Then in like 2008, maybe I got asked by Red Bull if I would help go take some pictures of Felix Baumgartner, and he's doing the secret project. And I was like, yeah, what's that? You know, I know he's an Austrian base jumper guy, but what's he up to? And I show up and he's training to jump from the edge of space in a space suit and all this stuff. And I was like, whoa. And I was just going to take some aerial pictures for one day.
Okay.
All right. That's all I was supposed to do. I was like, I got a paycheck to go out there for one day and take some pictures. I show up. I look at the equipment that he's using and I'm like, whoa, he's using a modified tandem parachute system, which I know way more about. And Felix is a super good dude. He's a highly trained athlete. He's a quick thinker. He's got all that stuff. And he has, you know, like 1,500 to 2,000 skydives, which is a lot of skydives. At the time, I probably had, you know, 15,000 skydives.
Okay.
Time, right? But he's the guy chosen to do this thing, and I'm just going to take some pictures. And I kind of talked to him like, hey, are you a tandem instructor? Do you know this and that? And he was like, well, no. And we talked for a minute, and I said, you know, super experienced guys with tens of thousands of jumps, I'll pull these handles in the wrong order, and they are dying with tons of experience jumping exactly what you're trying to do, and you don't have any with that. And they were like, yeah, okay, and, you know, kind of went about their stuff. The very next jump, Felix pulled the handles in the wrong order, and he almost died on one of the practice jumps early on. Like, almost dies. Very close. And the Cypress, which fires your reserve at the very last second to save your life, it fired, but he beat it. He actually was just a millisecond in front of it. So he actually saved his own life, but it was down and dirty. That evening, Felix, Art Thompson, and Mike Todd, the guys in charge of the project, asked me to come in, and then they asked me if I would be, you know, they said, hey, you saw this before it happened. Is there any chance you would like to come in and be part of this? And that changed my life at that moment, was being involved in a real test program. And that was where I learned all the stuff I didn't learn in school.
That's like a multi-million-dollar crazy project that you're a part of, the biggest thing you've been a part of in your life.
For sure.
And what are the things that you're doing in training with him that you haven't done before? I mean, are you in zero gravity? Are you experiencing like the crazy G's and all that stuff?
You know, they asked me I'd come in, and I said, yes, I would. But if I'm coming in, you kind of need to throw all this equipment away. You've been retrofitting stuff to work for a one-off project. We need to go with specific stuff designed for just this jump. There's a lot more riding on this than just this jump. The guy who had the record, Colonel Joe Kittinger, super cool dude. I'm happy I can call him a friend now. He's back from the days when you had to be tough. The different era. They were way tougher than we were.
Their impacts are a lot harder,
Oh,
right?
dude. And Joe just turned 90 the other day. Happy birthday, Joe. He's a super cool dude, Colonel Joe. He did that jump 50 years before Felix did.
Okay.
And nobody had broken that. People had died trying to. So my job was to redesign the equipment, test it all, and have Felix, train him up for the jump. So I went out and found some of my sponsors who I believe in. Every one of my sponsors I believe in, and I use their product. And I got my parachute manufacturer and my container manufacturer together, and we all collaborated, and we came up with the system that Felix ended up jumping. And I did a whole bunch of test jumps on it, trying to make it not work, right? Your idea is to try to make it screw up until it can't anymore.
You obviously don't go up to the stratosphere, but where are you on jump day and what's your role?
So when Felix did the real jump, obviously there's one person in it. Yeah. We did training jumps up to, 35,000 feet with the two of us together and stuff, but it's really one guy on his own, right? So on the real jump, I get them launched. I turn everything on for him right before he gets in the capsule. I check all the skydiving equipment. He gets in, and now I'm responsible for the recovery helicopters and their placement and making sure everybody is where they need to be. I had designed a piece of equipment that Felix wore on his wrist that if he were to pass out and start spinning too fast, it would automatically deploy the drogue parachute.
Okay.
That would slow the spins down so he wouldn't red out and kill him on the way down. He did get in a spin. It wasn't fast enough to make that thing go, which is great. And then he regained control, so everything worked good. So my job was to make sure all of that stuff was working on the day. And I was able to have my 4-month-old son there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. I guess he was maybe 8 months at the time. But yeah, it was really cool to have him there for that jump.
Did everything go as planned? Because there's sometimes behind the scenes, sometimes they don't go as planned, but the end result was as planned.
Yeah, the end result, and to toot my own horn for a minute, I'm in the mission control, and the Red Bull doesn't do anything half-ass, right?
Yeah.
It's like a full-on space mission control, right? And I'm at my table, and only 2 consoles can talk to Felix in the space capsule at 128,000 feet. He'd been breathing into this mask and feeling the condensation goes on the screen, goes away, goes on the screen, goes away, goes on the screen, goes away. And you look at that for 3 hours and hear yourself breathing like Darth Vader, right? He'd been in this capsule for 3 hours now, breathing this thing, and he thinks his mask is fogging up, that the face shield heat isn't working. And he talks to Joe and he talks to Art, and they're trying to sort it out. And then Felix says, I want to talk to Luke. And they had some command that they'd said that cut the live feed for a minute because they didn't want to broadcast if there was any issues. And he goes, hey, I want to talk to Luke. So I had to go up there, and I get on Joe's console, and I'm like, hey, what's the problem? He goes, my face shield is fogging up. What do you think I should do? We had done all the skydives together. He knew I knew the equipment as well as he did. I said, well, hey, if it starts to fog up when you jump, wait till your suit depressurizes because it fills up with air when you're at altitude. When you feel your suit start to get soft, count to 60 as slow as you can and open your parachute. Because if you open it too high, you don't have enough oxygen to live to get down, right? If he opens it at 30,000 feet, he's not going to have enough O2 to get down to the bottom. And he says, okay, great, got it. And I go back to my seat. That was really cool in that moment. For me, that was like the crowning achievement of that project, was to have the trust of the guy getting ready to jump right before he goes to be like, hey, this is out of protocol, but I need to talk to Luke about what's going on. And that was really cool.
And you're able to comfort him. And that's probably at that point, if you have any questions about your gear, Yeah,
it was a 30-second conversation, and it was very concise and clean. And like, I hadn't prepped for that, but we all knew our jobs so well. I told him that. He said, okay. And that was the end of it. And he went on and jumped from 128,000 feet and broke the speed of sound.
That is insane. You've had a lot of other opportunities in your career. I think Iron Man, Godzilla, Fast and Furious 7. When you do those projects, is that like a year paycheck in one day or 4 days?
No, not quite. Not like a year paycheck. Iron Man was a very cool experience. My first time ever working in the movies. And it was a pretty big deal. We all played ourselves, kind of. We're like reporter in the plane. The scene got cut, but I was supposed to be a drunk reporter. And I was hitting on the flight attendant, which was really funny. And then, so we did all that, and that part didn't get in the movie, but I'm still the guy who gets rescued. I'm the last guy that he catches in Iron Man, where their Air Force One blows up and they're going down. I'm the last guy that they rescue right before they hit the water. And it was pretty cool. My face was from the top of the screen to the bottom. And that was a really cool experience. It opened the door into doing some stunt work once in a while, which is really cool. I mean, it's not year paychecks by any means, but it's good money. I'm not going to complain about it.
It's better than office paychecks for sure. And then with all the opportunities that you have when you do the things with Felix and you do other projects, how often are you traveling? Are you away from the family a lot?
Last 2 years, I've been home quite a bit. But before that, I was on the road quite a bit. I mean, that first year, The first year that my son was born, I was gone a lot. And my wife wasn't too stoked on that. We're traveling a bunch, but I mean, she understands how we make our money. So I was on the road. I work with some military, training them. So I'm gone a couple weeks at a time here and there. And so when you're traveling quite a bit and then you're home, there's that weird when you have an infant and you've been gone for 2 weeks, you come home, they almost forget, who you are. And there's that whole get acquainted thing. And, and you're used to, I hope other people can relate to this, but I'm gone for 2 weeks. I'm living in a hotel. I eat when I want to eat. I go see a movie if I want to go see a movie. I have a beer if I want to have a beer. There's no time constraint. Then you come home where your wife's been taking care of your young son for 24 hours a day for the last 2 weeks straight.
Yep.
And wants a break. And you realize that you can't go get a beer or go to the store if you want to go to the store. And that's a little stressful time for anybody being a new parent, let alone when you're traveling so much.
You get the handoff from the wife so you can leave and go somewhere, and you're like, now what do I do?
Yeah, you're like, but I can go, this isn't what I do.
Yeah.
It is what you do now.
With your Red Bull time, did you ever spend much time with Shane McConkey?
I did get to spend some time with Shane. I would say just before he passed, I get to do a couple cool little trips with him. I had a good time with him and his wife at our buddy Pete Moran's wedding up here in Seattle.
Oh, yeah, I was there.
It was pretty fun. Yeah, my wife and I. That was a really fun time. Saw him on normal jump projects once in a while. But we went to Twin Falls, Idaho, and I did some base jumping at one of Miles's camps where he was raising money in town of Twin Falls. Miles Dasher, a teammate, raised the money, and Shane was there, and Shane was trying to make a whole bunch of jumps in one day because he got like a jogathon or something, right? Hey, if each jump, people were going to donate, $20 per jump, and he got a whole bunch of money to raise. And Shane did a whole bunch of jumps, and we had like a really fun 3 or 4 days there, and like that was the first time that I really got to know him away from just making a jump or two. And it was really fun. So it was a really sad thing, when he passed. Also, for someone like me, when people die in our sport, which happens all the time, people say, how can you keep doing this stuff after, somebody dies and, you have a family and all this? For me, I've always been able to explain away, oh, that wouldn't happen to me because I'm better than this guy, or I wouldn't think like that. I would think like this. That's how you have to do it if you're going to keep doing these things. Then a guy like Shane passes, and he passes, doing the most extreme thing you give me is wingsuit, ski wingsuit base jumping, right? In a place that you can't even get to. The only thing could have made that more extreme if he lit himself on fire. That would have been about the only thing that could have been more epic than what he was doing already. And someone at Shane's level who's on the top of his game, right? Like he was as quick thinking, as fast, as level headed, handled things in an emergency situation as anybody. I wouldn't say that I was more adapt thinking, and he lost track of time and altitude. He was trying to release his skis. He ended up not being able to, was late on his deployment, and that was what happened. And if someone of that caliber can lose track of time in that moment, it really made me think about what I need to do. And it changed my thinking of no matter what's going on, I cannot get complacent in what we're doing. Specifically, what I learned from an accident like Shane's is this last year, I had done this big extreme jump out of a plane without a parachute and all that. And I found myself in Tijuana, jumping into a soccer game at night in the misty rain, a little bit lower than probably advisable for the exit altitude, a little bit of shady stuff going on. I got out, I deployed my parachute, I had live air to ground system on and pyrotechnics. I reach back to deploy my parachute, it gets knotted up on the live camera system, and I start to mess with it, and I can't get it off. And all of those things from like a guy like Shane's accident and stuff where they lost track of time, all that flashes in my mind real quick. And no matter what's going on, I need to do my emergency. I can't mess with that any longer. And I need to deploy my reserve parachute. So something that happened to Shane, I use in my everyday life, right? In that instant was probably the sketchiest malfunction I've ever had in my life. In the rain, everything going wrong. And those things flash through your mind that somebody I respect highly could lose track of time. That's not going to happen to me. And you deal with it. So, if there's anything that you could take away from that is, someone who can think that fast can lose track of time. It made me think, hey, if that can happen to them, it for sure can happen to me.
I guess there was one jump where you didn't deploy a parachute because a couple years ago, there was the Heaven Sent jump. And if anybody saw that on TV, Luke jumped out of a plane without a parachute, and Luke is here on the podcast today. So everything worked out. But jumping out of a plane without a parachute, is that your idea?
No, man. Actually, another thing from Stratos. Like I said, from when Red Bull Stratos, Felix's Jump from the edge of space, that started my career in a different direction again. A guy who I worked with on that project came to me and he said, "Hey, I got this idea. We want you to jump out of a plane without a parachute." And I was like, "Oh, it's already been done." A guy landed in some boxes with a wingsuit, right? Really bitching in Gary Connery in England. I mean, unbelievable what he did. He had a base parachute on and crashed in some cardboard boxes. Unreal. I said, "That's not for me. No, thank you." They said, "No, we want you to jump without anything. And we're going to land on a slide. And you're going to go down this big, like a giant half pipe."
Yeah.
Right? And I was like, thanks, but no thanks. You know, I kind of like chuckled to myself. I said, "I'd love to be involved. I'd love to help you figure out how to do it. I'd love to find you somebody who can do this, because you could call any skydiver, and if you offer them enough money, they'll do anything. So I'd like to find you guys somebody who could do this, who's not going to do something stupid, but it's not for me. I got a wife and a son. Thanks, but no thanks."
Right.
I went in the house. I told my wife about that call, and we both had a good laugh. Like, these guys want to jump out and land on this half pipe, and in theory, it makes sense, but it's just too risky. I couldn't figure out how you could test it.
Well, if you have to land in the transition perfectly, right?
Yeah, if you screw that one up. Yeah, it's not going to blow your shoe off. It's going to blow your head off. So I ended up thinking about it. About 2 weeks go by, and I was up getting ready to ski at Crystal Mountain, and I was sleeping at Andy, and they have a house up there in Greenwater. And I head up to Crystal, and I figured it out the night before. I'm like, you know what? If you landed in a net, you could test it. You could run air cylinders that could absorb the impact. You could drop dummies into it over and over until you had it all figured out. And I came up with this light system, all of that. And I told my wife, we had to talk about it. She goes, "Oh, yeah, sure," because it seems like it's never going to happen. "Oh, yes, whatever, I trust you." Because it's like, it's like I'm going to fly someday, and it's just not going to happen.
Right.
So we're in the parking lot at Crystal Mountain. I called the guys up who were trying to put this together, who were getting the money backers and that stuff. And I said, "You know what? We could do it if we do it like this, and if we do it like that, and I don't get paid to do the jump. I get paid before the jump. I don't want to get paid to jump. I don't want to be thinking about money to do this. I want to do it to prove you could do it. If we go this route and I can bail at any time, then I'm in. I'm your guy." And in the Crystal Mountain parking lot, I made that call.
Huh.
And then I went up and skied the rest of the day.
They were cool with that. They were like, "All right."
Yeah. And I think actually being older now and looking back, and this is what they'd even said, the fact I turned it down to start with probably benefited me in the end. Right? It said, hey, this isn't some crazy jackass who doesn't care if he lives or dies. He's got a real idea.
And then in the testing of this, you have one test where you've got your wife and kid watching, and I guess the test result wasn't perfect.
Yeah. So we were doing like a half-scale test. We drop a dummy into the net from a helicopter. My buddy Aaron Fitzgerald drops it. Jim Churchman, the stunt coordinator on the ground, it blasts right through the net. The dummy hits the ground. Boom! Right in front of us. I mean, we're off at a safe distance. I'm sitting next to my wife, my son, and some of the other guys, Chris Talley, some other people that had a lot to do with the project making it happen. It was their idea. And they were like freaking out. And my wife and my son, my wife was not freaking out at all. They're like, how's she handling this? And to her, it was a sigh of relief because she knows I'm not going to do it, right? And she's obviously this thing isn't working. So she handled it way cooler than anybody else on the whole set because it was a test. And she goes, well, obviously he's not going to do it. Look, the dummy just hit the ground at 120 miles an hour.
So how many more tests do you have to go through before you figure that thing out?
Well, we figured out why it didn't release. It would have been like that particular time the net didn't release soon enough. So if you and I were going to throw a raw egg back and forth and I was going to catch the egg, I need to absorb that impact.
Yep.
So my hand needs to be moving with the egg and then slowly slow down. That's the idea behind the net. The net actually gets dropped just before I get there. So it's moving with me and it slowly absorbs your impact. That's the whole idea behind it. What happened is the net wasn't released early enough. So it'd be like your hand not moving away fast enough. Mm-hmm. It just would explode on your hand. So instead of that, it ripped through the net. And the netting we were using was a test net of inferior quality for that particular test.
And you eventually figure this thing out. And from what I see, the big issue with the jump is you're facing down and looking at your target. And then a split second before the landing, you have to flip over onto your back. That makes the whole thing happen. Was that what you were worried about with the whole thing?
Actually, the hardest thing about the whole jump, the part I was worried about the most, and it was a little shocking the way some of my team wasn't as concerned about this. They had such faith in me. Oh, he's going to hit the net. He's going to hit the net. But it would be like if you're in a river and the river gets faster and slower and faster and slower and you have to swim at the same pace to not move down the beach. You need to stay in the same spot. So sometimes it's raging, sometimes it's not moving at all, sometimes it's even going the other way. So you have to, in the air, fight those currents the whole way down to stay over this 100 by 100 foot net. And that was hands down the hardest part of the whole jump, was to get there and stay over the top of that net just before impact. And then right before we hit, because it's like a giant hammock, when you lay in a hammock in your stomach, your back's kind of arched out. Well, this is going to be a hammock times 10,000, right? When you hit it, it's going to really fold you up. So we wanted to be on our back so it folds you like a taco instead of like a backwards, like a banana and break your back. So just before impact, I have to roll to my back. So we did a lot of training, a lot of practicing in wind tunnels and testing to where I wasn't moving at all when I rolled. I didn't slide left or right. I was coming straight down. But still, you have to go blind. I'm not a big ski jump guy, like all these tricks, but I imagine it's going into a ramp backwards.
Yeah.
Without looking at it, right? Not even looking over your shoulder, but going blind and trusting that when you hit the edge, you need to do this. So at 350 feet or so, I'm watching the net, and it's the only thing we were never able to practice. I rolled to my back. And when I rolled to my back, I rolled about a half a second early to my back because it's all timing and you're doing it in the moment. No idea. And so I was like there. I was a little off to the side, but I knew I was safe in the zone. So instead of trying to slide to the right 15 feet, 20 feet and stop and then roll, I knew I was in a safe spot that we had tested to. I stayed there. I rolled to my back and I did it a fraction early. And it was like if you're reaching for a step in the dark and your foot is like 2 inches from the step and you feel like you're going to die, right? You feel like you're going to fall and break your ankle. And then when you touch the step, it's like, oh, it's right there. So I rolled and I tensed up for impact. It was like, huh! And there was a millisecond of like, oh shit, I missed. And then whack, you hit the net and it was all good. But it was like, I just was like, you had just time. You didn't even get the thought out in your brain of like, oh my goodness. And then bam, you're in the net and it rolls you to the center. I got to say, when it rolls me to the center, I say a couple F-bombs as I tumble to the middle. And I'm laying in the middle of the net. And when I watch my audio later, I had a little camera on my chest, a little GoPro on my chest. And when I watched the audio, or I listened to the audio after watching the camera, when I'm laying in the net and the net's suspended in the air, Michael Gervais, the sports psychiatrist I worked with, he said, take a minute to enjoy this. I mean, nobody is ever going to experience what you are right now for the first time. Like, take a minute. And I was shocked at how much emotion came over when you're like, I'm not a super emotional guy, but you're in this net and I'm good. Everything's great. I got my hands over my face and I can hear my voice and say, oh my goodness, Luke, oh my goodness. And I kind of like take a couple deep breaths and I get quiet and you can hear my breathing get a little heavy for a second. And then the net lowers down. I touch the ground. And the weirdest part about the whole jump for me was not the exit without a parachute because you're so focused in what you need to do. You're just in the zone, right? Doing your thing. But it's over now, and I have to stand up off the ground. The net lowers me to my back on the ground, and I have to like get up off the ground. And getting up off the ground is the craziest thing.
Just jelly legs?
Yeah, I just had to like stand up, and I'm like, well, that's that. And then I watch an Andy and John and Jeff Rowe landing under their parachutes that I had just jumped out with. And my wife comes over, big hug, the whole bit.
And that's the jump that pays for your house.
Yeah, that was Stride Gum, not Red Bull. Red Bull passed on that one. In my opinion, I think they made a big mistake.
Right.
And I think later that who knows what their opinion would be. But I understand why. We had a couple accidents with Red Bull athletes, nothing to do with anything except guys flying wingsuits in the mountains being super gnarly. And it seems super risky when you bring them an idea of jumping out of a plane without a parachute. So I get that. And that's the part that Red Bull doesn't get credit for sometimes. Like there's some stuff where they were like, whoa, we need more time to think about this. And I'm like, you don't have much time. We're trying to line up other people. And Stride Gum came in and stepped up. And I'm very fortunate to have had two sponsors that believe in me enough. I mean, Stride believed in me enough to put me on live television jumping out without a parachute. Yeah. That doesn't happen.
It was the TV event of that summer. I felt like it was so
crazy.
Awesome.
And I mean, one of the goals, be honest, most of us, you don't hear people talk about it much. I didn't get rich on that job, but I was able to build my dream house. And I have something to show for my jump for the rest of my life.
And this thing's paid off, right?
It's my home.
That's amazing, man. That is really awesome. So your next big stunt is coming up. I don't know when, but I believe it involves your cousin, Andy Farrrington, who's looked at as one of the best in the world as you are. And what are you guys scheming up?
Yeah, so I grew up with Andy. He's lived next door my whole life. He's my cousin. He's younger than me. by, 8 years or so. He's, in my opinion, one of the best all-around skydivers in the world. Like, all around. You name the type of skydiving, Andy can do it. He's super natural with that. We're both pilots. I had been thinking about this for a long time since I got sponsored by Red Bull. I pitched this idea. And it was just a scratching on a piece of paper I sent in. And they passed on it. I'm hoping that they don't pass on it this time. I'm still working on it. But Andy and I are going to hopefully take off. One of us in one airplane, one in the other. Nobody else in the airplanes. Small single engines. Take off, go up to 14,000 feet, put the planes in a formation dive next to each other, nobody else in them. We're going to get out, switch airplanes. We're going to ghost ride the planes for about 30 seconds in formation while they're diving at the ground. He's going to go get in my plane. I'm going to go get in his plane.
Well, that's insane. I guess that takes it to another level from the no parachute jump.
Yeah, we'll be wearing parachutes this time.
Yeah.
But there's too many variables to not wear parachute. The last jump with no parachute, I eliminated almost every variable possible. This one, there's just too many things. But it is a little sketchy, and it's going to be super rad. We get to involve our flying, and my favorite part's the research and development and all the testing, and figuring out how to do it is my favorite part of the whole project.
And I would think if you have to use your parachute on this one, it didn't go well.
It didn't go well, and there's an expensive airplane.
Yeah. And how do you get FAA clearance for this kind of stuff?
We're still working on it, but we're going to use some emergency parachutes in them, so there's not going to be a plane crashing randomly. So they'll have their own emergency parachute in the plane that can deploy like the Cirrus airplane type. We're going to do it out, obviously, in the middle of nowhere. We control every part of this thing. I'm able to do these really cool things, and it's because we don't do them like some crazy jackass. They're like a thought out, and we go through the process of figuring out how to do it. We address all of the concerns of whatever the governing party is and all the safety concerns, and then we go out and do it. Right. And I'm still hoping to pull this one off. This is one I've been dreaming about for a long time, and it's going to be fun to do something with a partner on this.
When do you think this will happen?
I'm hoping to do it in 2019. That's what I'm hoping.
And speaking of Andy Farrington, this brings me into my last section of the show. I call it Inappropriate Questions. And I had Andy come up with 3 inappropriate questions for you. And they're all really good ones because he has a lot of background on you.
Yeah. I hope there's not one about soap operas, but I bet there is.
No, there's not one about soap operas. Are you really into soap operas?
When I broke my foot one summer, I got into General Hospital. I was into it for a while.
So we are at the part of the show that is Inappropriate Questions. And I have Luke's cousin, Andy Farrington, who is arguably the best skydiver in the world, on the line. And Andy is going to ask 3 inappropriate questions to his cousin. Andy, what do you have for question number 1?
Oh, man. 3 inappropriate questions towards Luke. I would say, man, I don't know if it's a question or not, but whether he's ever done a naked snow angel in a cemetery.
So there you have it. Have you ever done a naked snow angel in a cemetery? It just sounds wrong all around, but have you?
At the World Meet in Innsbruck, I believe, and we were coming back from the bar, and I don't know how it ended up, but I was doing a naked snow angel coming back from the disco, and we didn't realize it was in a cemetery until we stood up. I felt super bad the next day.
So not calculated, we're going to the cemetery to take our clothes off.
No, I wouldn't disrespect somebody, and I hope the gentleman I was laying on top of enjoyed it.
And now let's jump into question number 2.
Number 2, maybe where is the weirdest spot that he's woken up with his clothes folded completely, using his shoes
as a pillow?
Yep.
That's funny. We're doing a skydiving trip in my younger days in Acapulco. Staying in a swanky little hotel. We're jumping on the beach right out there. I went out to a club with some people that I met, and then the club got shut down, and the girl that I was with knew somebody, and I don't know what happened, but I'm pretty sure that I got roofied because we woke up at the hotel in the grass of the hotel with my clothes completely folded. I was in my underwear, everything folded, socks in my shoes, everything, and my head was on top of my shoes in the foyer of this swanky hotel we were at. I woke up with the security guard poking me with his nightstick. No idea.
You didn't get in any trouble?
No, I never heard another thing about it. It was the most awkward. I went back to the room and Andy was in the room. I was like, dude, I just woke up out there. They said, we lost you guys last night, and that was the end of it.
Weird.
So someone hopefully has pictures of something I don't know.
They might come up one day, when you least...
When I run for president.
We will close it out for Luke with question number 3.
Question number 3. Let's go with how his experience was while eating Lake Erie trout and skydiving.
Oh, this is a good one. This is a good story. Am I supposed to tell a story about it? Is that what you want?
Yeah, well, I heard you say, when you heard that question, so I'm sure there's a story that goes with it. Talk about Lake Erie trout and skydiving and what happened to you.
Oh, it was early in my Red Bull career. We went to Cleveland. We were doing a jump into a car race in Cleveland right by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I went out to dinner with all the Red Bull people. And, my mom and dad raised me. You go out to dinner and someone else footing the bill. Don't order the most expensive thing on the menu.
Yep.
I like lobster and crab and the steak and stuff. But I also like fish and chips. And I was one of the first people to order at the table. And it was a massive table. All of the Red Bull FMX riders were there. Tommy Clowers, the whole crew, doing their whole FMX motorcycle show. And I was one of the first people to order. And I was like, well, I'll have the Lake Erie fish and chips. But I didn't really think of Lake Erie as being whatever. A Lake Erie fish and chips. The next 10, 12 people ordered the Alaskan king crab legs. And I was super bummed, but I didn't want to change my order. And we went out. We had a great time that night, partied it up. The next morning, I have never been sicker in my life than Lake Erie. And Andy was like, what'd you think was going to happen? That lake lit on fire at one point in its life. So I jumped in, waved to the crowd on the stage, went to the van, which was luckily parked next to Porta Potty, and spent the whole afternoon going back and forth out of either end. And then I was dying, and it was so hot and humid. Miles Dasher grabbed me, one of my teammates, most base jumps in the world, by the way. He grabs me, takes me over to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because it's air conditioned, and we hung out in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for 4 hours watching the Beatles on a screen, trying to recover. It was miserable.
Have you ever been in the air when you've had to just take a huge dump?
No. I've had to pee in the air before, and Andy could actually tell you. I've never peed in the air, but I know of people who have turned around in their harness and peed back in the day under their parachute. I have never. I've had to go, but it always goes away. I usually have to pee no matter what the jump is. Even if I went right before, I have to pee just before I jump, and then not after I land. But I didn't pee my pants, so I don't know. I think we call it the nervous pees.
Okay. I'm going to ask one last question, even though I usually don't after inappropriate questions, but you are in a high-risk profession, and what is your closest call? Have you ever had something where you really just didn't think it was going to work out, but it did?
Yeah, in the moment, you don't have time to think about it like that. So I've had ones where I've landed after the fact, and that evening thought about, holy shit, you barely made it through that. The one in Tijuana last year, when I lost that parachute, somebody has a Red Bull car cover in Tijuana from my parachute that I cut away. That one over Tijuana where my parachute got tangled around my live TV camera stuff and everything that was lining up wrong. So when I deployed my reserve, my main was still hooked up. So my reserve parachute, which is your last chance, goes right past my main where it can entangle. It is super sketchy. That's hands down the sketchiest malfunction problem that I've ever had. And along with that quick thinking or, not losing track of time from Shane, I'd also had a stunt guy tell me a story, Tim Rigby, after my no parachute jump. He gave me some really good advice that I would hand to anybody else. After your most sketchy thing you ever did, right? I was laser focused on this no parachute jump, right? You're in the zone. You're dealing with everything. Boom, boom, boom. You go back to normal life. And my normal life is skydiving and flying and goofing off. You go back to normal life, everything seems lame, right? Everything seems mellow. Yeah. So you lose that focus and you kind of become a little bit complacent in that time. And I would say that's what happened on that jump there, is that you have to focus the most after you just finish focusing hard, because now everything, so what? I'm jumping to a little stadium in Tijuana, who cares?
Right.
And that turned into could have killed me. And that would have been a bummer. I was thinking I'm going to die over Tijuana, and I just jumped out of a plane without a parachute from 25,000 feet. Crazy.
Well, man, you have had an awesome career in a business that really wasn't career-worthy when you were growing up. If you were to be a skydiver when you were 15 years old, if that was your dream was to live at a drop zone and get as many jumps as possible and make no money for life. But Point Break came out and changed everything for you. So Keanu and Patrick Swayze saved your life. I thank you for coming on the show, man, and it's awesome to see everything that you do, and I can't wait to see your next stunt.
Thanks for having me. We'll have to chat after this next one.
So that was time with Luke Aikins, and he is one down-to-earth, chill dude. A lot of people would assume that a professional skydiver may be a little bit of a loose cannon, a pure adrenaline junkie who lives for the moment, but Luke is not that guy. He's a calculated risk taker who defies the Johnny fucking Utah Point Break stereotype. But at the end of the day, calculated or not, the stunt he has planned with his cousin Andy is absolutely batshit crazy, and I can't wait to see them pull it off. So that's the show for this week. I'll be back on Monday with another amazing guest. Until then, please give me a 5-star rating on whatever platform you listen to me on. If you're on an iPhone, it takes a minute, and here's what you need to do. Go to podcasts on your iPhone or iTunes, search for the Powell Movement, scroll down to where you see the stars, hit 5 stars, and you're done. Thank you so much for doing it. And I also want to ask you to sign up for my newsletter, aka the Poos Letter, on my website, thepowellmovement.com. That'll have all the info on latest guests and upcoming shows, so please sign up for that. I want to thank you for listening to the show. Thank my sponsors, Evo, Rescue Water, and the 10 Barrel Brewery for making this thing happen. Have a great week, everyone.